Well, I've already covered the worst graphics card you can actually still buy new, but that card actually released with a purpose. This card, well, it simply just didn't have one. This right here is the Geforce 9500 GT, and well, it came out in 2008 for around £80 or $90. And while not all variants of this card were actually so bad, most of them, well, struggled to find a place on the market, even with a price drop down to £45 or $50 by the time a few months had passed. We have the Asus variant here, which is representative of most variants of the card, and is based on the Tesla architecture on the 55nm node. With a core clock of 550MHz, 32 shade units and 1GB of GDDR2 VRAM, the card does not sound too bad, and don't get me wrong, this isn't a hate video, it's not a bad card. It just sort of served no purpose being on the market, due to the HD3650 being more game ready and only costing £9 more, and the fact that the HD4850 had amazing price to performance and only cost a little bit more than that. It's not exactly like it could pass for a media card either, as it suffered with up to 60% more CPU usage when decoding HD video. Meanwhile, the cheaper HD4330, which also used less power, actually only did 30%, so it's not a media card, it's not a gaming card, it's just sort of there. And it's not like it's aged well either, as right now the cards can sell for upwards of £20 or dollars, which is even more than the AMD cards cost now. So this isn't exactly like something that strikes me for great value for your money in 2017. But hey, at least this card is certified for DVD playback, so that's something useful if you want to go for 2008 style DVD playback. I like to say before anything that there were some nice variants of the card, such as the Galaxy variant, which featured boosted clocks and a slightly larger TDP, but also sold for £90, which is where the price points were too close to the AMD cards, hence the fact that it struggled to gain any traction. It generally amassed to some decent levels of performance in 2008, but most tests had to be run at 1024 by 768. However, it was better than the Intel GMA chips at the time, and still my favourite quote from any reviewer of these cards has been, "Setting this bar this low means that game developers have to actually put time and energy into targeting hardware this crappy." And well, they were right. It worked out cheaper for many to buy last year's flagship cards, which not only ran the games better, but generally garnered more support from driver optimizations and actual support from the developers. Regardless of this though, we're going to be swapping out the AMD Fury and replacing it with the 9500 GT to see exactly what this little thing can do nearly a decade after its release. It can only run DirectX 10, but that doesn't mean we can't push it to its limits, which were already met back in 2008, but we can run a few benchmarks, get a nice little overclock on it, which we did do, with 720MHz on core and 470MHz on memory, which is a nice little boost considering these are the stock voltages. But then again, at the time the AMD cards also overclocked very well, so it's sort of a winning battle on both sides. Anyway, let's find out how a 10-year-old hunk of junk handles itself in some new games. First up, to get you all excited for performance, we have GTA 5 getting a playable frame rate with 30 FPS on average, 24 FPS 1% lows, and 21 FPS 0.1% lows. It didn't look great in 800x600, but I've definitely seen worse. And it was somewhat stable given the frame times. It's truly a testament to how well this game works on poorly made hardware, but a modern day Intel HD chip will beat this by a long shot. Up next, I decided to try something a little bit more competitive with CSGO in 800x600 with low settings. 720p proved unplayable for anything actually in-game, however dropping that resolution down a tad to 800x600 made the game a whole lot more playable, with 55 FPS on average, 1% lows down to 26 FPS, and 0.1% lows down to 14 FPS. Not ideal for a competitive game, as there was a weird form of input lag that I've never had before with any other cards. However, it did run, and when I moved to windowed mode that did fix the input lag. Skyrim was one of the better experiences we had, as even when things got intense, we still achieved a solid 35 FPS average. I mean, you can see what's going on in this benchmark, with 20 FPS 1% lows and 16 FPS 0.1% lows, when we ran it in 720p with medium settings, of course. A few of the more intensive options were set to low, but it still looked decent and ran decent too, and I was surprised considering the fact that this card struggled with some of the games, but not this. Now, this is one game that I haven't really played for a long time, but you guys keep wanting to see it as a benchmark, so here's Payday 2 running with low and medium settings in 800x600 at a moderately smooth 31 FPS, with 24 FPS 1% lows and 23 FPS 0.1% lows. Changing the settings any lower didn't really increase performance enough to actually yield the graphical loss in fidelity, so it just wasn't worth it. The game could be improved if you mess with some config files, I suppose, but really, this game, you're not going to get any more performance than this. One thing the reviewers did say would run fine was older games, so Battlefield 2 with 900p and the high settings enabled was no exception. We saw well over 100 FPS for the majority of the time, which led us to a 98 FPS average, 73 FPS 1% lows, and 68 FPS 0.1% lows. So the game was definitely smooth and playable, and you might get away with pushing up the resolution just a tad more. Civ 5 was a weird one. No matter what I set the graphics to in the game, it ran at around 30 FPS. So I just went with medium settings, which scored us a nice 30 FPS average. The game did dip down into our lows of 12 FPS, but that's sort of to be expected in Civ as it drops down on any system. Altogether playable given the nature of the game, but still not ideal for a good experience. I did decide to give Emulation a quick test, as using the DirectX 9 backend is possible with Dolphin Emulator, which worked fine with most GameCube games even when I had 1.5x resolution scaling enabled. But then again, some of the more intense games could prove to be of an issue, but Wind Waker and games like that seem to run absolutely fine as long as you use the DirectX 9 renderer. For Wii emulation, you will be limited to native resolution with the DirectX 9 renderer once again. And in the older titles like Mario Kart, you can get away with a decent experience, although I did have anisotropic filtering turned up a bit as the Wii games do really quite need it. However, newer games will have graphical issues due to needing a newer API, and the OpenGL causes driver issues for some reason. But really I'd need to investigate this further before I can confirm it, but all I know is Super Mario Galaxy looked like an acid trip. So here we are at the end of yet another video, and after using this card for a full day, I can confirm that this card serves absolutely no purpose. The drivers for it are nice, which is one thing, and definitely nicer than the HD3050 and 4000 series drivers are, but these cards aren't cheap, and the alternative cards from AMD are cheap. And these cards show no signs of dropping in price, which the AMD ones are. They're way too expensive for what they offer. Media playback was okay, but opening too many tabs causes the PC to slow down. Benchmarks show that the card was better than an Office PC, but that isn't exactly hard to beat considering how bad old GMA chips were. It's a card that had no place and is still too expensive and rare to actually have a place in any recommendations list, but it's not rare enough to actually justify finding it interesting, and it's too expensive to actually care about its performance, as there's just nothing there to justify it in a gaming PC. But there we have it, the 9500 GT nearly a decade later, and I still can't find a reason to keep it. Good night. So in case you wanted some more content, Patreons now get full mini videos in case you wanted some more. You can chat to us over on the Discord and expect a big video coming in the coming weeks. Of course, I'll catch you guys in another video.